The rain drummed against the windows of their small apartment as Nora Chen folded tiny onesies, her 7-month belly, making the simple task more challenging than it should have been. The soft yellow and green clothes, chosen because they'd wanted to be surprised by the baby's gender, lay in neat piles on their bed, soon to be just hers. Marcus Rivera stood in the doorway, his architect's hands trembling as they gripped a hastily packed suitcase. His dark hair was disheveled, and his usually confident posture had crumbled into something she'd barely recognized. "You can't just leave," Nora whispered, not looking up from the tiny sock in her hands. "We're having a baby in 2 months, Marcus." "Our baby. That's exactly why I have to go." His voice cracked. "I'm not ready for this, Nora. I thought I was, but I'm not. My parents are right, we're too young, we don't have enough saved." And I stopped, running his hands through his hair. "I can't be the father this baby deserves." Nora finally looked at him. Her brown eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "So you're just going to abandon us? That's your solution?" Marcus's family had never approved of their relationship. His mother, a prominent lawyer, and his father, a successful businessman, had made their disapproval clear from the beginning. When they learned about the pregnancy, the pressure had intensified. Daily phone calls, surprise visits, constant reminders about Marcus's bright future and how a baby would ruin everything. "It's not abandonment," Marcus said weakly. "It's giving you space, giving you a chance to find someone better." "Don't want someone better." Nora's voice rose despite herself. "I want you. The you who used to stay up all night talking about what our child would be like. The you who painted the nursery 3 times because you wanted it perfect." Marcus looked toward the small room they'd converted into a nursery. The walls were a soft sage green, with hand-painted clouds that he'd spent weeks perfecting. A mobile of paper cranes hung above the cribbage, one folded during their quiet evenings together. "I'm scared, Nora," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "What if I mess everything up? What if I become like my father, always working, never around, caring more about success than family?" "Then we figure it out together," she pleaded, struggling to stand. "That's what couples do. That's what love means." But Marcus was already moving toward the door. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." The sound of the door closing echoed through the apartment like a gunshot. Nora sank onto the bed, surrounded by baby clothes, and finally let the tears fall. Outside, the rain continued its relentless drumming, washing away the last traces of the life she thought they'd build together in the distance. She heard his car engine start, then fade into the night. The struggle 2 weeks had passed since Marcus left, and Nora's world had shrunk to the size of her small apartment. The morning sickness that had plagued her earlier months had returned with a vengeance. Triggered now by stress rather than hormones, she sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, trying to focus on a logo design for a local bakery. But the numbers on her bank statement kept swimming before her eyes. The knock at her door came precisely at 9 o'clock, just as it had every morning since Marcus left. "Come in, Ruby," Nora called, not bothering to get up. Ruby Martinez shuffled in with a steaming mug of ginger tea and a plate of homemade toast cut into perfect triangles. At 73, the retired teacher had lived in the apartment next door for 15 years and had appointed herself Nora's unofficial guardian angel. "You look terrible, Mia," Ruby said matter-of-factly, setting the breakfast down and pressing the back of her weathered hand against Nora's forehead. "When's the last time you ate something that wasn't crackers?" "I ate yesterday," Nora mumbled, though she couldn't remember what MMO. Ruby's sharp brown eyes took in the scattered bills on the table, the dark circles under Nora's eyes, and the way her hands shook slightly as she reached for the tea. "What did the doctor say at your appointment?" "Everything's fine. Baby's healthy, growing well." Nora's voice was flat. She didn't mention that she'd sat in the waiting room watching couples hold hands, or how the ultrasound technician had awkwardly asked if the father would be joining them for future appointments. Ruby pulled up a chair, her joints creaking in protest. "You know, when I was pregnant with my Miguel, his father took off too. Different reasons, he was already married. The coward, but the fear was the same." This was the first time Ruby had mentioned her son's father. Miguel lived in California now, a successful engineer who called his mother every Sunday without fail. "How did you manage?" Nora asked quietly. "One day at a time. One meal at a time. One doctor's appointment at a time." Ruby reached over and squeezed Nora's hand. "And I learned that sometimes the people who stay are more important than the ones who leave." The insurance forms scattered across the table seemed less overwhelming when Ruby helped organize them. The prenatal vitamins were easier to swallow when Ruby reminded her to take them with food. The fear of giving birth alone felt less crushing when Ruby promised she'd be there if Nora wanted her. "I keep thinking he'll come back," Nora admitted, as they sorted through baby clothes, donated by Ruby's church friends. I know it's stupid, but every time I hear footsteps in the hallway, my heart jumps." "It's not stupid," Ruby said, folding a tiny yellow sleeper. "Hope isn't stupid, even when it hurts." That afternoon, Nora had her 30-week checkup. She drove herself to the clinic, hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The waiting room was full of glowing couples, their excitement palpable as they whispered about nursery themes and baby names. Nora Chen. The nurse called her name with practiced cheerfulness as she followed the nurse down the familiar hallway. Nora caught her reflection in a window. Her face was fuller now, her body clearly showing the pregnancy, but her eyes looked hollow. She barely recognized herself. The appointment went smoothly, blood pressure normal, baby's heartbeat strong and steady. But when the doctor asked about her support system, Nora's carefully constructed composure cracked. "I'm doing this alone," she said simply. The doctor, kind woman in her 50s, handed her a list of local support groups for single mothers. "You don't have to do this alone," she said gently. "There are resources, people who understand what you're going through." Driving home, Nora made two decisions. First, she would attend the support group meeting next Wednesday. Second, she would stop checking her phone every 5 minutes, hoping for a text that would never come. Some hopes, she realized, were worth keeping. Others were just chains that kept her from moving forward. The shadow Marcus Rivera sat in his rented studio apartment across town, surrounded by wood shavings and the smell of varnish. His hands, once steady enough to draft precise architectural blueprints, trembled as he ran sandpaper along the curved edge of what would become a rocking chair's armrest. It was his third attempt. The first two had cracked under the pressure of his inexperienced hands. The apartment was sparse, furnished only with essentials he'd bought after leaving his family's spacious home in the hills. His parents had made it clear, come back and fix this situation by convincing Nora to consider adoption or lose their support entirely. Marcus had chosen exile. His phone buzzed with a text from James Caldwell, his friend from architecture school who'd remained close to both him and Nora. "She looked tired at the grocery store today. Still buying those ginger snaps you used to. Get her." Marcus closed his eyes, remembering how Nora would nibble those cookies during her worst morning sickness days, claiming they were the only thing that didn't make her nauseous. He'd driven to 3 different stores to find the exact brand she preferred. James had become his unwitting lifeline to Nora's world, never directly betraying her confidence, but offering small details that kept Marcus tethered to the life he'd abandoned. A mention of her latest doctor's appointment, news that her elderly neighbor was helping her, the fact that she'd started going to a support group. Each piece of information was both balm and torture. Marcus picked up his phone and almost called her for the 100th time in 6 weeks. His finger hovered over her contact, the photo still showing them last Christmas. Hello, da la 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 do la la da do la 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 da. Her hand resting on her barely there bump while they laughed at something his sister had said. They'd been so happy then, so certain of their future together. Instead, he set the phone aside and returned to his work. The rocking chair was taking shape slowly, painstakingly. He'd never been good with his hands the way his contractor grandfather had been, but desperation was a powerful teacher. YouTube tutorials played on his laptop as he learned to join wood properly, to sand with the grain, to apply stain evenly. This chair would be perfect. It had to be. Every evening, Marcus found himself driving past the clinic where Nora had her appointments. He never went inside, never even parked nearby. But knowing she was there healthy and safe eased something tight in his chest. Last week, he'd seen her walking slowly to her car, one hand pressed to her lower back, and had to grip his steering wheel to keep from jumping out and helping her. She was 32 weeks now. If his calculations were correct, he'd been marking each week in his phone's calendar, reading pregnancy websites with the dedication of a medical student. He knew their baby was about the size of a squash now, that Nora's feet were probably swelling, that she might be having trouble sleeping. The guilt was constant, a weight that sat heavy in his stomach. But it was the fear that kept him away, not just of Nora's justified anger, but of his own inadequacy. What if he hadn't changed? What if he was still the same coward who'd run when things got difficult? "You're an idiot," James had told him. Over coffee the previous week, "She's scared too, you know. The difference is, she didn't run." Marcus had stared into his cup, unable to argue. Now, at nearly midnight, he held up the rocking chair's nearly finished frame. The wood was smooth under his fingers, the joints sturdy. He'd carved a small heart into the headrest, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Inside the heart, he'd etched the date of their first ultrasound appointment, the day they'd heard their baby's heartbeat together. His phone buzzed again. "James. Emergency room. She's okay, but she's in labor. 34 weeks. Thought you should know." Marcus's hands went numb, and the sandpaper fluttered to the floor. He grabbed his keys, then stopped, frozen by the familiar paralysis. What right did he have to be there? What could he possibly offer besides his own guilt and regret? But his feet were already moving toward the door. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. By the time he reached the maternity ward, visiting hours were over, the hallways dimmed and quiet. He found her room number from the information desk, then stood outside the door like a sentinel. Through the small window, he could see her alone, brave and beautiful, even in the harsh hospital lighting. He wasn't ready to face her, but he could. Keep watch. He could be her shadow. Until he found the courage to step into the light, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Nora gripped the hospital bed rails, her breathing ragged and uneven. The contractions had started suddenly at 3 a.m. sharp, demanding pains that sent her stumbling to the phone to call Ruby, who'd rushed her to the hospital in her ancient Honda Civic. "You're doing beautifully, honey," said nurse. Patricia Williams, a woman in her early 50s whose calm presence had been Nora's anchor for the past 6 hours. Patricia had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and hands that moved with practiced gentleness as she adjusted Nora's position. "Baby's eager to meet you, but we need to take this slow. 34 weeks means she'll need some extra care." She, their daughter. Marcus had always insisted the baby would be a girl, claiming he could tell by the way Nora carried her. The memory hit like a physical blow, and Nora had to close her eyes against a wave of grief mixed with pain. "Is Ruby still in the waiting room?" Nora gasped between contractions. "She's right outside, dear." Security bent the rules a bitchy, told them she was your mother. Patricia smiled, checking the monitors. That woman wasn't taking no for an answer. The labor was progressing faster than expected for a first baby. Patricia explained that premature babies sometimes came quickly, as if they sensed they needed to make their entrance before anything could stop them. Each contraction brought a mixture of anticipation and terror to finally meet her daughter. Terror at facing it all alone. Outside in the hallway, Marcus sat in a plastic chair he'd dragged from the family lounge, his architect's. Automatically cataloging the sterile efficiency of the hospital design, while his heart hammered against his ribs. He'd been there for 4 hours, watching medical staff move in and out of Nora's room, catching fragments of conversation through the partially open door. Ruby had spotted him during one of her bathroom breaks, her sharp eyes narrowing as she recognized him despite his rumpled appearance and days-old stubble. "So you're the coward," she'd said quietly, stopping directly in front of his chair. Marcus had looked up, expecting anger, but found something more complex in the elderly woman's face. Disappointment, yes, but also a strange kind of understanding. "I don't deserve to be here," he'd whispered. "No," Ruby had agreed. "But that girl in there deserves to have someone who loves her nearby, even if she doesn't know it. Even if you're too much of a fool to go inside." she'd left him with those words, returning to Nora's side while Marcus remained frozen in the hallway. Close enough to help, but too afraid to try, the sounds from the room intensified. Patricia's voice calm but urgent, giving instructions, medical equipment being wheeled in, and then a sound that stopped Marcus's heart completely. Nora crying. Out. Not in pain, but in effort, in determination, in the primal strength of bringing life into the world. I can see her head, Patricia called out. One more push, Nora. That's it. Perfect. And then silence. One terrifying moment of absolute quiet that stretched like an eternity until the cry came. High, indignant, unmistakably alive. The sound of his daughter announcing herself to the world. Marcus pressed his face into his hands and wept for joy. For shame, for the moment he'd just witnessed from the shadows. His daughter's first cry, and he hadn't been holding Nora's hand. He hadn't been there to cut the umbilical cord or whisper words of encouragement or tell Nora how incredible she was. Through the door, he could hear Patricia's cheerful voice. She's small, but she's a fighter. Look at those lungs. And Nora, you were amazing. Absolutely amazing. Is she okay? Nora's voice was exhausted but alert. Her breathing. She's perfect. A little small at 4 pounds, 2 ounces, but her lungs sound clear. We'll want to keep her in the NICU for observation, but she's breathing on her own. Marcus stood slowly, his legs unsteady, and moved closer to the window. Inside, he could see Nora cradling a tiny pink bundle, tears streaming down her face as she gazed at their daughter. The baby's cry had settled into small, hiccuping sounds, and even from the doorway, Marcus could see the perfect miniature fingers waving in the air. Patricia was cleaning up efficiently, while chatting softly about feeding schedules and NIC protocols. Ruby stood beside the bed, one weathered hand on Nora's shoulder, her own eyes bright with tears. She has your chin, Ruby observed, and look at all that dark hair. Dark hair like mine, Marcus thought, his heart breaking and mending. Simultaneously, she has dark hair like mine, as dawn light began filtering through the hospital windows. Marcus finally understood what he'd been too afraid to see before. Love wasn't about being ready or having all the answers. It was about showing up, especially. When showing up was hard, he looked at his daughter, their daughter, and made a silent promise. He would find a way to earn the right to be in that room, to be the father she deserved. But for now, he would keep his vigil, guard them from the shadows, and prepare for the hardest conversation of his life. The return morning light filtered through the hospital room's blinds as Nora stirred awake, her body aching in ways she hadn't expected. The events of the night felt surreal. Had she really given birth? The empty feeling in her abdomen confirmed it, along with the soreness that radiated through her entire body. She turned her head toward the bedside table, expecting to see the standard hospital water pitcher and tissues. Instead, her breath caught in her throat. A letter lay propped against a small wooden object that made her heart skip. The envelope bore her name in Marcus's distinctive handwriting, the same careful lettering he used on his architectural drawings. Beside it sat the most beautiful rocking chair she'd ever seen, scaled down to dollhouse size but perfect in every detail. With trembling fingers, she reached for the letter, her mind racing. How had these gotten here? Nora, I know I have no right to be here. No right to write this. No right to anything concerning you or our daughter. I know that. But I need you to know that I never really left. I've been outside your door for hours, watching from the hallway like the coward Ruby called me. She's right. I'm a coward. I'm trying to learn how to be brave. You were incredible last night. I heard every moment, and I wanted so badly to be holding your hand, to be telling you how strong you are, how proud I am of you. Instead, I sat in the hallway like a stranger, which is what I made myself when I walked away. I built this chair for our daughter. It took me 8 weeks, working every night until my hands bled. I've never built anything before, but I needed to make something with my hands, something that came from love instead of fear. The real chair is in my apartment, full-sized, waiting for when she's old enough to use it, if you'll let her. I left because I was terrified of failing you both. But I failed you by leaving. I see that now. I failed you in the worst possible way, and I don't know if you can ever forgive me. I'm not asking to come back. I'm not asking for anything except the chance to try to be the father our daughter deserves, and the man you once believed I could be. I'm not the same person who ran away. I've spent every day since trying to become someone worthy of the love you offered me. Our daughter has your chin and my hair. Ruby told me she's perfect, and of course, she's yours. I'll wait as long as it takes. I'll prove to you that I can stay, that I can be counted on, that I can love you both the way you deserve to be loved. I love you, Nora. I never stopped. I just forgot how to be brave enough to show it. Marcus P.S. I named her Sophia in my heart. It means wisdom. I thought maybe she could teach us both how to be better. Nora's hand shook as she set the letter down, tears streaming freely now. She picked up the tiny rocking chair, marveling at its craftsmanship. Every joint was perfect, every curve smooth. She could see hours of patient work in every detail. Could imagine Marcus hunched over his small table, learning to use tools that were foreign to his architect's hands. The door opened quietly, and Nurse Patricia peeked in. "How are you feeling, honey? Ready to see your little girl again?" "Yes," Nora whispered, wiping her eyes. "But first, was there someone here earlier? Someone who left this?" Patricia's expression softened. A young man. "He didn't come in, just asked me to put those on your table after you woke up. Said he didn't have the right to be here yet, but that he was working on earning it." She paused, studying Nora's face. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. "Is he still here? In the family lounge down the hall?" "He's been there all night." Nora closed her eyes, feeling something shift inside her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something like possibility. Marcus had stayed. He'd kept vigil through her labor, through the birth, through the long night hours when she'd been recovering. He hadn't run this time. Could you ask him to come in? I think. "It's time we talked." Patricia nodded knowingly. "I'll get him. But first, let's get you cleaned up a bit. And maybe we should bring your daughter down from the NICU. I have a feeling she's going to want to meet her daddy." As Patricia bustled around the room, Nora held the tiny rocking chair to her chest. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough to undo the months of pain and fear, but it was a beginning. First step back from the edge of the cliff where Marcus had left them both. Outside in the hallway, she could hear Patricia's voice, gentle but firm. "She wants to see you. But Marcus, don't you dare make her regret this chance. That girl has been through enough." "I won't," came Marcus's reply, hoarse with exhaustion and hope. "I swear to you I won't." Nora smoothed her hospital gown and touched her fingers to her lips, tasting salt from her tears. In a few minutes, Marcus would walk through that door, and their daughter would meet her father for the first time. It wouldn't be easy. Trust once broken was harder to rebuild than any structure Marcus had ever designed. How does she looked at? The tiny rocking chair, imperfect in its handmade, charm but sturdy and made with love, she thought maybe they could find their way back to each other, one small step at a time.